Today I'm going to give you the top 2 reasons why I'm going all in on multifamily housing right now. What's going on, everyone? My name is Lucas Miller, host of the YouTube channel Fear Free Passive Investing, host of the podcast on the same name, and I appreciate you stopping by and watching this video. Today we're going to talk about the top 2 reasons why I'm going all in on multifamily right now. But first, if you're new here, welcome. Consider subscribing. We help busy professionals navigate the world of passive commercial real estate investing. We cut that learning curve down so you can start earning passive income faster in commercial real estate. If that sounds like something you're interested in, stick around. All right, on to today's show. So one of the questions I've been getting a lot lately is, are you still buying multifamily? Now, I've heard a lot of people saying that they're done buying multifamily. They don't want any part of it. They're done buying real estate in general for right now. They're just kind of on a wait and see type thing. And I'm the opposite right now. I'm going full bore, trying to find deals right now to buy as quickly as I can. We're finding a couple good deals, and we're going to talk about why. The top 2 reasons why I'm going full bore in right now. All right, so number 1, I'm calling this pandemic pricing. Now, of course, COVID is wreaking havoc on a lot of businesses and a lot of things and a lot of real estate investing too, especially hotels and stuff like that. We'll get into that in a minute, but pandemic pricing is something I've kind of given to what's going on with the market right now. There was definitely a pause in the multifamily deals that were coming out on a regular basis, and now we're starting to see some adjustments based on COVID and the situation surrounding that. So I'm calling this pandemic pricing. Now, I don't want to confuse anyone and think that there's these massive windfalls where you're buying properties 20 cents on the dollar. It's just not happening. I know there were some investors that were saying like, "Oh, I'm raising a ton of money because I'm going to buy deals like 20% off the current price," and it never happened, right? I think maybe some people did. I don't know. I never saw it. So that's not what I'm talking about here. First of all, pandemic pricing, I'm kind of using that as a general term, but let's talk what it's doing to deals right now, starting with debt. Now, debt was kind of interesting. It kind of took a pause and almost stopped lending in a lot of scenarios when COVID really started to pick up steam here in the US. But, you know, it's starting to come back. It's starting to, become as normal as it can be, right? It's never going to be back to where it was, at least not in the meantime. We got to adjust things here and there. And mostly what they've started doing is requiring more reserves and just being generally a little safer with their lending. They're not lending as much money, and what they are lending, they're requiring to be securitized or at least backed by usually principal and interest reserves that you have to keep or raise to close the deal. So let's talk about the reserves. And so a lot of people hated this, right, when it first came out. For a while, it was like up to 18 months principal and interest reserves payments that you had to have at closing in an account. That's since been relaxed a little bit, and it's not quite as severe as that now. But I'm going to talk about why I like the reserves thing. Number 1, it's giving investors comfort. If we show that we have 12 months or 9 months or whatever that requirement is, if we show investors like, hey, we've got a whole year principal and interest reserve payments banked up, that's another security for you that we're going to be able to weather a storm if something should happen. Now, we'll likely never have to touch them, which is another plus for this. I hope we never have to touch them. It's a possibility, but I hope we never have to, in which case we can just give the money back, which is awesome. So if we're raising money from investors, we can just give them the money back. Now, if you're smart and you understand investing, you'll know that might dilute returns. If we're raising money, we don't have to. Now, that's when pricing starts to come into play. Everybody who is getting a loan is having to deal with the exact same thing that I'm having to deal with this reserve stuff. So everybody has to raise the reserves, which means the sellers are very likely going to have to understand that they have to come down in pricing. Now, it's not going to be a lot, but it'll be enough to make a deal worthwhile. If you couple that with now interest rates are really starting to get really low, especially right now when I'm filming this, and it's kind of hard because it's fluctuating constantly, but we're seeing agency debt, which is like Fannie and Freddie, those big loans. Those are like sub 3% right now, which is really insane on some refis that I've heard. Now interest rates are low, but also, in-place debt is another benefit to this pandemic pricing. You can assume loans a little bit easier, and it's becoming more and more popular. So people are doing that now. But let's also talk about the concessions, because that's part of the pandemic pricing too. Now, one of those concessions could be a lower price. You could be asking for a lower price based on one thing or another. But it also could be other things, a little more unique. And this is where I think multifamily really shines over some of the other asset classes. Now, we talked about those reserves. You can negotiate that the seller could put those reserves up. So instead of you having to go and raise that money, now you can have the seller kicking in that money. And the seller wouldn't probably like that a little better, because in theory, they might not be taking a hit on price. And in theory, if the property runs really well, they're going to get that money back. So that might be a win-win scenario for both of you. Another one that we've kind of implemented too is sort of a guaranteed income. And of course, nothing is guaranteed, right? We never want to use that word in real estate. However, what we're talking about here is if February's rent collections were really good for your property, you could say, okay, Mr. Seller, February did really well. We're going to ask that you guarantee that level of income for the next 6 months. Now, that will carry you through a lot of storms, 6 months. And so if you can guarantee that income, any shortfall income, so let's say let's just say May comes in at 112,000, and you had 115,000 when you started, that's a delta that seller would have to kick in and guarantee that. So something like that would be kind of cool. And then one of the more rarer ones, but I have heard of someone actually pulling it off, or at least coming close to pulling it off, is seller financing. Big multifamily. Of course, it's very common in smaller stuff. Sub 100 units, it's pretty common, I would say. Maybe sub 60 units. But 100 units and up, that's very rare. So, but it could be possible. If you have a mom and pop seller who doesn't really need the money, it could be a unique scenario where they don't have to take such a hit on their pricing. So all that to say, pandemic pricing kind of encompasses a lot of things, and it's time to get creative, and it's time to start asking for things you normally wouldn't have in a seller's market. All right, moving on to point number 2, the possibility to time the market. Now, I have to put a giant caveat here saying that you never, ever should try and time the market. If you ask anybody who tried to play options or play fast and loose during 2008 and were buying things and hoping they would appreciate so they could turn around and sell them, they will tell you that timing the market was a very hard thing to do. Now, of course, that's the consensus in the stock market too. If you try and time the market, it's a whole lot riskier than just buying and forgetting. But you never want to do that. You always want to find a deal that cash flows well if you're conservative, of course. Now, if you're not so conservative with your investment style, then by all means, try and time the market. If you're more conservative, if you're confident that you don't want to lose your money, then you got to have some sort of aspect of cash flow with your deal. That's really what makes real estate safe, is that cash flow aspect. That's going to help you get through a lot. And appreciation is great, but it really should be treated as icing on the cake. Market appreciation, I should say. Now, with that out of the way, I also believe that multifamily is going to be in much higher demand in the coming months than it is right now. And some people would probably say the opposite, but I'm not. I believe that the demand for multifamily is going to continue to increase because of what we just went through with COVID. Now, assuming there's not another wave, assuming there is not a national moratorium on evictions, some sort of confounding variable that I haven't seen yet, I truly believe that multifamily is going to come out ahead, because you have so many people that probably lost their shirt in hotels, office space, some retail, things like that got hammered. And so you're looking at a whole bunch of investors that just lost some money and are now fearful of where they should put their money. They're going to look to what worked. And for right now, during COVID, that was industrial, that was multifamily, and that was maybe a few other things here and there. But multifamily is always the darling of investors because it's just stable. And so I believe that we're going to come out on top. So I believe all that money that is in those other asset classes are going to come pouring into multifamily, which is only going to increase demand for these properties. And of course, when demand goes up, so does pricing. So my theory is that if interest rates can stay low, and actually maybe if they don't even stay low, cap rates are going to compress for multifamily. And so putting that all into this tip for why I'm going all in is that getting in a good deal that cash flows a little bit or a lot, that would be nice too. But getting into a deal that cash flows and is in a good market and it has good fundamentals on its own, it stands by itself, I do believe we are going to experience some sort of market appreciation because of that demand that's going to continue to grow. Sales are still hot. Sales are going to be hot for the next, foreseeable future, assuming those things we talked about stay in place. And so I believe that, whatever you get into is going to experience some sort of market appreciation. Now, of course, submarkets play into that. A lot of different things play into that. So that's why I'm saying the deal has to be good and it has to stand on its own. But I do believe if you can get into those, they're going to be good for you in the long run. So there you have it. There are my top 2 reasons why I am going all in on multifamily right now. I'm curious what you're thinking. Do you believe that multifamily is going to continue to see a lot of demand, cap rates compress, or do you think the opposite is going to happen, or something else? I'm curious what your thoughts are on the economy. Let me know down in the comments. I'd love to start a conversation there. But thanks everyone for tuning in. I really appreciate it. Can't wait to talk to you next time.